So the CUR Fellows Awards recognize 2 CUR members who have facilitated undergraduate research, scholarship, and creative activities at their institution through mentorship and demonstrated leadership activities. These 2 CUR Fellows are leaders and role models for those involved in undergraduate research, scholarship, and creative activities. Joining us today are the 2020 awardees, Dr. Michael Dorff and Dr. George Shields. Michael Dorff is a professor of mathematics at Brigham University and a former department chair. For the past 2 years, he has been serving as the president of the Mathematical Association of America, the largest US professional organization that focuses on undergraduate level mathematics, including undergraduate research in math. Michael has traveled to 49 US states, so we'll have to talk to him about that last one, and 48 foreign countries, often to give talks and workshops related to mathematics. Recently, he's been to East Africa, such as Rwanda, Uganda, and Ethiopia, and Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and Malaysia. And even more recently, he's now going through travel withdrawals because he has not done any traveling for the last 8 months. He's married and has 5 daughters, and in his spare time, besides all of that traveling, he enjoys reading, writing, baking, and even has made up to 500 mini cheesecakes for a daughter's wedding. And he also enjoys exercising, such as running outside, or again, his daughters have convinced him to ride one of those indoor Pelotons. And when life slows down, his goal is to write a book on mathematics and art. I'm going to admit a few more people into our meeting. George Shields grew up near Syracuse, New York, and he chose to go to Georgia Tech to try a new part of the country and escape all the snow. His father was an electrical engineer, and since he liked chemistry, he thought he would be a chemical engineer when he first started at Tech. His senior year of college, he had the chance to TA a general chemistry lab, and that motivated him to obtain a master's degree, so that way he could eventually teach high school. He found research to be fun and exciting, so he stayed for his PhD. He moved from studying chemical physics in graduate school to biophysical chemistry as a postdoc. And since then, he has promoted undergraduate research at every stage of his career, while he worked in a variety of primarily undergraduate institutions, including chair positions at Lake Forest College and Hamilton College, dean at Armstrong Atlantic State University and Bucknell University, and now Furman University, where he was previously the provost and vice president for academic affairs and continues as a professor of chemistry. Thank you both for joining us today. And with those introductions, I'm happy to now turn it over to Michael Dorff for an overview of his work.
All right, thanks, Robin. So I'm a mathematician, and mathematicians love to solve problems. So here was a problem 15 years ago. I would hear from colleagues at other mathematicians at other universities saying that they were interested in getting started in undergraduate research, but they didn't know how to start. And they didn't have a lot of resources available. So a few of us came up with this idea to create a center for undergraduate research. And basically we went to NSF and we said, give us a bunch of money and we'll act as a mini NSF and distribute this money to small PUIs, to often pre-tenured faculty so that they can learn how to do undergraduate research and support their students. And that's how we started the program called CUR, which started again about 10 years ago, the Center for Undergraduate Research in Math. In this program, faculty members do undergraduate research during the entire academic year with their own students at their own institution. And CUR offers them a 3-day summer faculty training workshop before the program begins, a course buyout, so they're not doing undergraduate research on top of everything else they're doing, but they get a course reduction, and then that's replaced with doing group undergraduate research. We give a stipend to students so that the students don't receive some type of financial support, so they maybe don't have to work as much outside. And then there's a student celebration conference at the end, and the students have to write a paper and a presentation. Okay, the next slide. Here are some of the results from CUR. 312 students have participated, a variety of students. We've had 120 student co-authored research papers, lots of presentations. And almost 100 faculty participants in here. So that's one of the programs that I've done. Let me go to a second program now called Pick Math. And see, next slide here, yeah. So here was another problem. This came up about 8 years ago. NSF actually put out some feelers to some of the professional mathematical science organizations and said, look, we support a lot of students to go to graduate school, but we know that there are undergraduates, in fact, a majority of undergraduates that go into industry and business and government. Is there a way that we can get a program to support them? So we pulled together Susie Weeks, who is at WPI right now. She and I pulled together some people from industry. We came up with an idea, and this idea became Pick Math. PIC stands for Preparation for Industrial Careers. And the idea is to create a semester-long course where the students are basically doing a research project, an undergraduate research project, from a problem they get from industry. They don't have to be advanced students. They can be first-year, second-year students. In fact, we've had 6 community colleges participate in the program. Students do the research in the groups. There's very little lecturing, but it's more the mentoring environment. There is a consultant from the industry that works with these students on the problems to give them some guidance, and it prepares the students for careers. Just like the current program, the Pick Math has a summer training workshop for faculty, because we found most faculty don't know how to work with industry, how to get a problem, or even how to solve these problems from industry. A semester course when the students have to finish the course by writing a research paper and doing a video presentation. And then we have a student celebration conference in the summer. And then on the last slide here, we've got some of the results of the Pick Math program. This is over about the first 4 or 5 years of the program. We've had over 1,400 undergraduate students participate, 150 co-authored papers by students, 150 conference presentations, 125 universities that have participated, all different types, even from PhD institutions down to community colleges, HBCUs, HSIs, and we've had over 150 industrial partners who have provided consultants and problems from industry. So those are the 2 main programs that I've done with undergraduate research, and I'll turn the time back to Robin.
Thanks so much, Michael. And now we will turn it over to George Shields to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to tell you about a couple of initiatives that promote undergraduate research and enhance the productivity of faculty in the next few minutes. Mercury has been a driving force for encouraging more students to pursue STEM careers and for increasing the diversity of students going into chemistry. I formed this consortium in 1999, and we have written and received 6 NSF MRI grants since 2001 to support it. We have hosted 18 annual conferences starting in 2002 until the pandemic prevented last summer's meeting. And the next slide shows that more information on Mercury here. We started this with 6 colleagues at liberal arts colleges in the Northeast, including Mark Zimmer at Connecticut College, Maria Gomez, then at Vassar College, and Carol Parrish, then at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. We didn't realize at the time that item B on this slide would be the key to our success, that the networking and educational activities help the faculty who attend the meeting be much more productive. It is hard to keep up a research program over a long career at a PUI. So role models, support networks, and exchanges of ideas are critical for all the faculty who attend these conferences. The meeting is open to everyone, not just the 40 current Mercury faculty and their students, and all attending faculty and all of their students add immensely to the annual meeting. Next slide. The Mercury Consortium's focus on excellence, diversity, and inclusion for both faculty and students is one of the hallmarks of this program. Mercury faculty have worked with more than 1,000 students now, and 75% of them have been female and/or students of color. Half our graduates attend graduate school, and 2/3 of those attending graduate school are female and/or students of color. We've worked hard to have a very diverse group of speakers at our annual meetings, and the diversity of the science presented and of the participants is always stunning to everyone at the conference. The mentoring of junior faculty by senior faculty and vice versa is a key part of why the Mercury faculty publish 3.4 times the usual rate of publications for physical science faculty at primarily undergraduate institutions, according to Research Corporation's 2000 benchmark study. Next slide. I started working with students in their first year of college when I was at Lake Forest College. At Hamilton, I started an early introduction to research program by taking students into my own lab early in their undergraduate studies, and then developed programs to bring in students to science research labs directly after high school graduation and before starting college at Hamilton. Benefits at Hamilton were increased retention of STEM majors, increased graduation rates, and higher GPAs for the students. At Armstrong, which had much fewer resources and a less prepared entering student cohort, this intervention proved to be quite remarkable, as you can see from the slide. Bucknell is near the end of their program with striking results for increasing the number of underrepresented students in STEM fields. At all three places, this program worked because of the highly mentored, real research projects, combined with eliminating the bias that faculty have about their students who come in less prepared, biases that are removed when their diverse research students are successful in the laboratory setting. Next slide. I have had the wonderful experience of working with 124 undergraduate researchers, 69 of whom are female and 26 who are students of color. In addition, 3 postdoctoral associates, 3 senior scientists, 2 high school teachers, 4 high school students, and 2 post-baccalaureate fellows have worked in my lab. Shields Lab alumni have gone on to pursue a variety of graduate and professional schools. We have been able to do excellent science over a long period of time. My students have received more than 36 national awards, and I am extremely proud of all of my current and former research students. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for that. We'll now open the floor up to questions. Please remember to use the raise hand feature if you'd like to register your question live, or you can also place your question in the chat. Our first question is for George. When you first were creating the Mercury Consortium, how did you set out to create the network, and where and how did you find your initial collaborators?
Well, in the very beginning, we had written an HHMI proposal where we were trying to bring computing through the entire curriculum, and HHMI didn't give us the money for that. But I thought, gee, maybe I could do this just with computational chemistry, even if we can't do this throughout the entire curriculum at Hamilton. So I started to look around for computational chemists who were in the Northeast, because I had this idea that we'd have this Northeast consortium. And I was particularly looking for women and or faculty of color who were assistant professors so that we could get this started. And from the very beginning, we could be focused on diversity and inclusion. And so we had colleagues from St. Lawrence University, Colgate University, and Vassar and Mount Holyoke, and it just worked very well. I had to go and actually twist the arms of Maria Gomez and a couple of the other junior people to tell them that this wasn't going to be too much work, that I would write the proposals, and we together would be able to thrive, and that has in fact worked out. Maria ended up moving from Vassar College to Mount Holyoke, and Carol, of course, moved from Hobart and William Smith Colleges to the University of Richmond, and they both had fabulous careers.
Wonderful. Another question for you, George. The Mercury Consortium has emphasized diversity of faculty, student, and institutional participants. Have you considered including international institutions, or do you think that that might involve logistical challenges?
Well, so over the years, we've gotten bigger. So we started with 7 and now we're up to 40. And so we have finally set up an executive committee, and we're trying to be as organized as possible because of our growth. So it turns out that because of the, I guess, the greater publicity that we've had, we've actually been contacted by an international organization that would like to send faculty across the pond to come work at our colleges. And so we're actually thinking about that right now. We're thinking about how we can leverage that opportunity and build more interactions with colleagues overseas.
Great. A question for you, Michael. When working with your research questions that came from industry partners, what, if any, preparation did you have to do to reframe your traditional research approaches?
Yeah, good question. So I think in academia, we get very comfortable with the types of problems we do. They're often, at least in the math field, the traditional research problems are very theoretical. We're trying to find the solution, the one way to prove that this thing is true. And they're very academically oriented. It's not something you would probably read in the popular press. You know, Michael Dorff solved this problem about harmonic univalent functions. Don't think I would see that in the news, the local news. So the faculty had to change their thinking to solve these problems from industry. The problems now are more practical. Instead of looking for the solution, industry is often interested in finding the best solution you can get in a certain period of time. Like, you have 3 months, what's the optimal solution you can give us in that 3 months? And these problems are often of interest to the community, so that they do appear in the news. A lot of the people who participate in Pick Math are able to share the types of problems that they're working on, that their students are working on, with the local news. The other reframing is to get people in industry to rethink about what we do in academia. Because often, especially in math, if you just go to them and say, hey, we have a group of math and computer science and stats students that want to help you, do you have a problem? They're not going to respond really positively to that. But if instead you go to them and you say, hey, what are the problems that your company's working on? And you listen to them, and then maybe say, oh, well, we could probably help you with doing this type of problem. Or having in your back pocket a list of sample types of problems that they might be interested in, so that they give a kind of a feel for what types of ways students could help them. And we found that that's really helpful to reframe both the way the professor thinks and the way that the industry thinks.
So you mentioned like framing those questions. Could you possibly share a couple examples of some of those projects or problems that industry provided, or maybe that you provided to industry?
Sure. Yeah. So here's a problem, and we've all probably seen this. Suppose a business has an online site that ranks a certain product. In one example, in a Pick Math project, the product was video games. So you have the site, they rank video games. The maker of the video games has an incentive to actually submit bogus ratings, because if their product looks better than others, it goes higher in the rankings, and people want to buy it. So they could either submit a ranking or a rating using a bot that puts theirs higher or puts other ones lower. And so, given the submission for these rankings, can the student group determine what are some factors that might determine whether a rating is bogus or real? So that's an example of a problem. Another one real quickly is that's common that we've used is cities and local school districts have bus routes. When were these bus routes made? How were they made? Often they were just kind of haphazardly made. And the demographics changes over the years. Can the students take the data from the school district or the city and determine, is this route the best route? Is there a better route? What does it mean for it to be a better route? Things like that. Those are two examples.
Great. And you mentioned, industry looking for the best answer at the point in time in a short period of time. What level of success have those undergraduate teams had in providing those answers in the time frame that industry is looking for?
Right. So like anything we do, whether it's teaching or undergraduate research, the first time you do something, I don't know about everybody, but for me, I think about the first time I taught a class, the first student I did an undergraduate research project with, it wasn't quite the same quality as what I do now. So it's a learning process. Having said that, so not all the projects are successful, but I would say that a vast majority are successful. And some of them are very, very successful, have very positive experience. To give one example, there was a project in Ohio where the professor and the students went to the city government and they got a project from the city government that the city government said, basically, can you help us with this, solving this problem? And the students worked on it for a whole semester. They came back and then they presented two possible solutions to the mayor and to some other government officials. They liked it so much that the mayor or the city government decided to implement one of the students' solutions into practice. And since then, that professor and his students have been able to go back every year to the government, to the local government, and get another type of problem for them to work on. So that's really, I think that's just really cool for students to then, later on, if they're doing a job interview, they can say, hey, I worked for my city government in Ohio, and this is what we did, and they liked it and they implemented our program.
That's great. That almost answers the next part of this question, which is to who ends up doing the legwork. So you just gave an example of the students presenting some possible problems, or some possible solutions, but then the city ends up taking it on and going forward. Do you find that has been consistently the model that industry has taken on?
Yeah. So usually we have the professor goes out and makes the initial contact, and that's probably one of the hardest things for the professors to do, to get out of their comfort zone and develop the skills on how to make that contact. But we talk about that in our training workshop, and then the students during the semester interact with the company, with the consultant from the company or the government or business, and then they give it back to the business. And if they want to implement it or use it, then they do. So yeah, it's kind of it's a whole combination of everybody working together. Many of the faculty who participate in the program are kind of our catchphrase is getting out of your comfort zone. You have to get out of your comfort zone in order to do something like this, which is a good thing. Thanks
so much, Michael.
Sure, thank you.
Question here for George. So when you're looking at your grants and you have, did any of them have co-PI that were from other organizations, or were they just other key personnel on the project? And if so, how did you distribute those resources? Just having a quick technical, there we go.
Am I unmuted now? I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we always had co-PIs. And so in the beginning, Mark Zimmer and Carol Parrish and Maria Gomez were co-PIs. Mark's no longer in the consortium, so Maria and Carol are still co-PIs on every grant we put in. And then as we've gotten bigger, every other Mercury faculty member who's been part of the program has been a senior investigator. And so we include all their information in the grants that we write. And we ask the sponsored program officers and the presidents and deans at their institutions to make sure that they have funding to come to our meeting. So they provide, every other school's providing support for the faculty member and the students to come to the annual Mercury meeting. And we emphasize this because we found that at the summer meeting that sort of networking that we were doing was the key for faculty to figure out how to be better. Like what Michael just said, when you start out, you really don't know what you're doing. And you get better over time, but you can be sped up in being better if you're able to talk to people who've already solved some of these problems before. And how do you work with larger groups of students? And how do you get your students ready to do whatever that technique is that you're trying to get them to learn in the lab? So we've had very good cooperation from all the schools. And now when we invite people in, see if they want to be Mercury faculty, or when faculty write us, they're quick and easy to get the support of their presidents or deans, because we've got a reputation where they want to be part of what we're doing.
Great, thanks. Well, as everybody here is listening to these great little tidbits, I want to challenge you to think about what potential collaborations you might be able to have. If you have some anecdotes that you want to share as well, please feel free to raise your hand and share stories of your own collaborations as well, or you can put them into the chat. We do have a couple other questions here. This one has a personal thanks. It's for Michael. So it says, a big thanks to you. CURM program was not just instrumental to my students, but also to my career. And his question is, do you think that high school students should be involved in research before they arrive at college?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think, and this is one maybe George also can put his thoughts into this. So I know that a few years ago, College Board created an AP exam called Research, where they were trying to simulate doing undergraduate research at a high school level where they could get university AP credit for doing that. I think it's possible, but there are some things that need to be worked out. One of the things that's interesting with the PIC Math program is because the problems are so broad and general, they don't require a lot of academic background. You could have university students and high school students working on the same problem. The way that they would work to solve it would be different. So the solution would be different, but they both would gain experience from it. And another example of a problem, and this comes from a community college in Texas, they actually connected, the faculty member and the students connected with the Houston Astros baseball team and got data from them. And the question that the Astros asked them was that occasionally we have promotional days where we'll give away a t-shirt, a hat, or food, or something like that. What is the effect of that? Does that change the attendance? Does it depend on the teams that come, that we're playing those days? Does it depend on the days of the week? Things like that. High school students could work on that one just as well as community colleges, just as well as PhD granting R1 institutions. So I think it's possible, but you can't the thinking is a little bit different on how you set up the program and what type of problems they work on.
Great, thank you. Another question here for George. Which different departments or resources on campus did you use to create the early introduction to research model?
Yeah, so I will answer that. And I also wanted to pitch in a little bit on what Michael just was talking about with, just can students do math or can they do physical chemistry when they haven't had those upper level courses? So when I first started teaching at Lake Forest College, we had this organic chemistry professor who was a lion. I mean that in the best way. He was just, a legend. And organic chemistry was the sophomore level course. And I taught PChem, which was the junior level course. And I had faculty tell me, well, students can't possibly do a physical chemistry research until they've had physical chemistry. And so what I observed was that my colleague, who was this great organic chemistry professor, swallowed up all the inquisitive, outstanding students after their second year of college. And so then there weren't nearly as many students who were available to do research with me who had had physical chemistry. So when I started teaching general chemistry, I started recruiting students into my lab who were bright and curious, and I figured they could learn as they went along, because research is a black box. Students don't really understand what they're doing until they dive into it and start doing it. And so that's how I got into it. Getting the right project for a student is kind of an art form. You really need to figure out, like Michael's example is a good one there, what a high school student could do, right? So when I set up this program at Hamilton to do the early introduction to research, which Armstrong and Bucknell have done as well, the idea was that we run a 10-week summer program, and halfway through the program, students will graduate from high school. And if they're planning to go to Hamilton, then we'll bring them into one of the science or math labs for 5 weeks. And so they would come in and have 5 weeks, and they've joined a group that's already in progress. So one of the students who's already in college can mentor the high school student coming in and be part of their project and start to understand what research is like before they actually start classes. So in terms of partnership, admissions was a big partner because they had to help us recruit students. And we found out, in fact, that this helped attract more students to come to Hamilton, because even if they weren't going to do research that first time, they said, wow, this is a place that's really serious about this. So that helped us recruit students. And then we had help with student life, because we had to figure out where are we going to put the students, how are we going to house them. I had a colleague, Leslie North at Hamilton, who was really wonderful about getting the students to have a good TA so that they wouldn't get in trouble over the summer. We were worried about the fact that we're bringing students into campus who had not yet started at Hamilton. So those partners were really important in helping us do this. And that's the same at Armstrong and Bucknell as well. We had to have broad participation across the different divisions to make sure that everything made sense and would work well for the students.
Great. And I know that the program that you put together at Armstrong had a pretty tight budget in that sense. Any special notes that you have for people that are operating on a real low budget cost to put together a program like this?
Yeah, well, writing grants is really helpful. So when I started this program at Hamilton, I wrote a grant to the NSF STEP program for $100,000. And then that paid for the stipends for the students for 2 summers of work. So they would work that first summer, 5 weeks, and then another summer for 10 weeks. And that was the basis for the program. And Hamilton paid for everything else. They paid for housing. They paid, any other costs that we had for the program. Well, Armstrong, yes, was on a shoestring budget. So that grant I wrote to NSF was for $1 million. And so I said, we're going to do the Hamilton project, but of course we need more money, and we need to be able to have students. We have to pay for the room and board. We have to, pay for math preparation. because students did not generally have as good a high school math preparation coming in. So, you know, writing the grant with the reality of your situation is really important. And at Bucknell, I think we wrote it for $500,000, and we focused on all underrepresented students. And but we did have an engineering department, so we had engineer faculty as well as math and science and computer science faculty working on the project. I think that's one really important way is grant money. And then the other thing at Armstrong, I had indirect cost money that came in, and I used that to support the summer science program. So before I took the dean's job, I negotiated that all of that indirect cost money that came in could be used by me to promote undergraduate research. And so that was really important thing that I thought of ahead of time, so that I had some money, because I started right when the Great Recession hit and the budgets just went down the tubes in 2008-09.
Great. We do have another question here, and this could really go to either of you. I'll throw it to Michael first. Having mentored these research students over all these many years, what would you say to junior colleges as the most important basis of quality mentorship? Sorry, not junior colleges, colleagues. Colleagues would make much more sense in that.
Colleagues about the quality of mentorship?
Yes.
Yeah, being a faculty member, I'm going to answer this the way, maybe not quite directly in the same way that people are thinking, but I think one of the important things to do for if you're a junior colleague, a pre-tenured faculty, is to actually join a community. Don't try to do this by yourself. I think when I started doing undergraduate research, I kind of thought I wasn't aware of all the resources and people available. All right, and so here I can put my plug in for CUR. If you're not a member of CUR, maybe your institution is an institutional member and you can join for free. If not, you know, find out about joining CUR. There's a lot of great resources available through CUR. Or maybe it's your professional organization. I have to put my hat on, being the president of the MAA. MAA is the largest organization that supports undergraduate research in mathematics in the US. And, you know, join an organization, get together with people. You can share ideas, you can share frustrations. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Maybe you're having a difficulty at your own institution or in your own research. Maybe someone's already dealt with that problem. Probably they have. You can learn from them. And then it's just great to interact with people. I think as I get older, I realize more and more the importance of not taking for granted the people I know, whether it's students or colleagues. So I think if I were to give advice to a young pre-tenured faculty who wanted to get into this, just make sure you get involved with communities, get involved with people who are already doing this so that they can support you.
Yeah, I agree completely that using your network and the CUR resources is a fabulous thing to do. So that would be my number one point as well. A second point that I would say, what makes you a great mentor is if you really care about your students, right? And so I remember my graduate school advisor, he's the one who taught me this. He would find out what his graduate students' goals were. And then he would tell you how, if you were successful at the research project you were doing, how that was going to get you towards your goals. It was very motivating. And I've carried that over into my own work with students, you know, finding out what their goals are and then working with them to try to get them to realize that this research project is going to help them meet their goals, whether that's medical school or graduate school, or they just want a good job after graduation. But these young people are full of ideas and full of goals. And I think it's great when we can help them win awards that are going to help them with their career. And so I think having that mindset of really caring about your students and wanting them to be successful is a key trait for mentors. And then finally, for junior faculty, you know, we all have the same amount of time, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on that time. And if you're a young mother, you know that you have pressures that other people perhaps do not have. And so you do need to use your time as wisely as possible. And so that means saying no to the things that are not as important and yes to the things that are more important. And so I think, again, going back to that first point that Michael brought up, use the people who are ahead of you and have gone through some of these things. Use your network and get advice on how to focus so that you can do the best you can with the time that you have available, because you're your own unique person and you have your own path that nobody else will have.
Thanks. So Michael, the more kind of broad question, if you were just starting over and you had all of this information that you have now, what would you do differently?
Yeah, so I would mention again what George and I said earlier about joining the community, using people around you as resources. That would definitely be one of the things. Another thing would be, so as president of the MAA, one of the fun things I get to do is every 2 months I get to write an article, a president's article for my association. And I just finished the next one that's coming out next month. And with everything happening with the pandemic, I decided to write about failure. We don't often talk about failure. And I think it's important for us to realize, you know, when people maybe look at George and me or other people that have more experience, it's not like we've always, you know, it's not like all of a sudden we started off as young faculty member and then all of a sudden we zoomed up and we're, at this certain level that we could get a CUR Fellows Award. It's a process, it's a learning process, a growing process. Just as I talked earlier about teaching, or undergraduate research, mentoring students, you learn from your mistakes. So don't be down on yourself if something doesn't work. George had mentioned about grants. I thought about the times when I applied to grants. I think the first 9 grant proposals I submitted, 8 of them were rejected. After that, the next 9 I submitted, only 1 was rejected and 8 were funded. So it's a learning process, and if you use your resources, people that have that networking, and don't be too down on yourself when something isn't successful, but instead learn from that and maybe take down notes like, okay, why didn't that really work out so well? What could I have done better? And learn from that, and then that can help you become better, more successful next time.
Yeah, that's really good advice. The biggest mistake that people make in grantsmanship is when they don't get the grant, they don't revise it and resubmit it. They say, oh, I guess it wasn't a good idea and I won't be able to do that. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes you don't have a good idea and you need to go back to the drawing board. But a lot of times you need to explain your idea better. You need to shape it a little bit better. Maybe you need to find a different program for it. But a lot of times, if you just work a little harder at it and don't give up, then you're going to be successful on the second or third time in. I certainly had a lot of failures too. And I appreciate what Michael said about the process. And, I remember when I first started out thinking how smart all these people were who were, senior to me. And then as I got older, I realized, well, they've just hung around longer. And you get better at things the more you do them. It's kind of like that 10,000 hour rule that people talk about. So if you're doing science or math or English or whatever it is, and you're doing it more and more and more, the more you do it, the better you get. When I was at Lake Forest College, I remember I submitted an article to a journal, and I got a review back from somebody who was like 2 sentences, said something like, typical undergraduate drivel, don't publish. And I did eventually get that paper published, but it just kind of reminded me that, you know, when nobody knows you and you don't have a reputation, then it's harder to make things work. But then once you get things to work, then it gets easier and easier. So I think people, when you're established, you can write a worse grant proposal and still get it funded simply because you have a reputation. It's not fair, but it seems to be how life works. So I agree with Michael completely. Don't give up, use your network, keep working, and trust that if you keep at it, you're going to be successful.
Thanks. There's some good discussion going on, talking about how failure is a great topic to discuss, and we are having more and more of these CUR conversations, and so maybe that would be fun. Let's just talk about all of our failures. Everybody comes on for an hour and talks through that, but definitely a good thing to discuss and what you can learn from it. There is a question here that is for faculty. Do you have any tips for faculty at primarily teaching universities on how they can balance or incorporate undergraduate research?
Well, I can take that. So, you know, Armstrong had a 4-4 teaching load. Lake Forest was 3-3. You know, different places have these different teaching roles, and whether they consider themselves to be primarily teaching or not, you know, that definition kind of depends on what the faculty decide at those different institutions. But Armstrong faculty, the College of Science and Technology that I was dean of, they definitely consider themselves to be teacher scholars. So even though they had a high teaching load, they wanted to do research. And so, you know, it's a balancing act to figure out how to do that, and it will depend on the situation. So just as an example, at Armstrong, they always had wanted to do a summer research program, but they'd never been able to get it off the ground because their human resources department wouldn't let them work with students more than 20 hours a week because they didn't want to pay them benefits. And they thought, erroneously, that if they had students working in the summer full-time for 10 weeks, that they would have to pay benefits. And then the other obstacle that they had at Armstrong was that they were getting their 9-month salary for teaching spread over 10 months. So in July and August, they weren't getting a paycheck. And so a lot of the faculty were trying to teach summer school so that they could fill that gap, because who can plug the hole with two months where you're not getting salary because you've already been paid. And so I was able to solve those two problems as dean because I knew they were motivated and wanted to do this summer program. So I used indirect cost money to pay the junior faculty to do research in the summer, as long as they would write a grant to NSF or NIH, which would eventually bring in more indirect cost money and pay for their salaries and for the students' salaries. So I used the indirect funds to do that. And then with the HR department, I had them contact Georgia Tech and the University of Georgia and find out that they were wrong, that yes, it's a common practice for students to work 10 weeks in the summer, and all you have to do is pay FICA. You don't have to pay, you know, the big benefits like what you need to do with full-time employees. So it depends on the situation. And I think it's important, you know, to just investigate how other places have solved these problems that are like you know, who are your competitors. And, you know, the administrations always love undergraduate research because of all the high impact practices that, you know, the jargon that we love to throw around in higher ed, it is the highest. I mean, there's nothing more transformational than an undergraduate research project. So I know my colleagues at different institutions across the country have spent lots of time educating their administrators so that they can understand that more money needs to go to support undergraduate research. And back to a comment Michael made earlier, CUR has a tremendous amount of information. CUR runs workshops on how to improve undergraduate research. And so I would say, don't give up. Think about how you can figure out how to do it at your institution.
Right. So I think we have time for just one last question that I'll pose to Michael first and then George. So what has kept you committed to working with students and undergraduate research for the length of your career?
Yeah, so good question here. You know, I think I know all of us, especially this year, there's so many demands on our time. Whether we're teaching, many of us are teaching on Zoom for the first time this year, and that's a learning curve. We're dealing with the stress of being isolated, not having the chance to talk with our faculty and our students, our colleagues, and our students as much. So why do we keep doing undergraduate research? And I guess I go back to this idea that it's people. People is what matters in my life. If I wanted to be, I guess if I wanted to be wealthy, I would have maybe chose a different career, wealthy financially, perhaps. But I feel like I'm really wealthy. You know, when I have a student who comes to me a couple of years after I've taught them, or a colleague who comes to me a couple of years after we've interacted on things, and they say that, you know, you made a difference in my life, that affects me. That touches me deeply. And to me, that's worth more than earning, you know, 5-10 times as much money as I do as a professor. And so that's why I keep coming back to undergraduate research, because that's the way I can really interact and impact students' lives the most, is by helping them be more successful. And I can do that with undergraduate research. It's not easy, and there are definitely times that it gets frustrating, especially during this pandemic. It is really hard, but knowing that I can impact the students' lives, that's what makes a difference for me.
Yeah, I think it's a special privilege to be able to work with 18 to 22-year-olds. They have so much energy and they have so much passion. And one of the things that I've noticed throughout my career is that sometimes my students' interests have driven my research program in a different direction. And, you know, I find that 10 years later, I'm doing something completely different than what I was doing before. And it's because of the energy and the passion of the students who are working on these undergraduate research projects. And so I think I pick up on that energy, and I love seeing the student success. And when students go on to grad school or medical school or whatever they happen to be doing, you know, and I now, a lot of them I'm hooked up with on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great invention. So I see how they're doing, and, you know, they're not always doing science, but they're doing careers that wouldn't have been possible if they hadn't done undergraduate research and really understood science. And that is really rewarding. And so I think that helps renew me and helps keep me passionate about working with my current student group and future student groups on undergraduate research.
Great. Well, thank you both so very much. I think that is a wonderful note to leave this conversation. Your work is inspiring, and it's clear why you were both selected as 2020 CUR Fellows. I want to thank everybody in attendance here today, some great questions that came through and some discussion in the chat. We're going to continue to hold these CUR conversations, and we'll hope that you'll keep these discussions going in the CUR community, and that you'll join us for our next conversation on mentoring undergraduate research virtually that will be out in December. And thanks again to everyone. And Michael and George, thank you so much.